So I knew what I had seen. There was never a question from the first time I saw the thing that this was, and I always thought it was extraterrestrial, that this was something fascinating, and I always wanted to find out what it was. So when I put the sightings together and I realized that nobody really cared about the sightings, that it was, it was interesting to tell the stories, but it really didn't seem to convince anybody. I had gone from there, and I had accidentally run in. My father worked for the government, and there was a guy in his office who had had a sighting, and he had told me about the Canadian government investigation in the early 1950s, and I figured, well, that'll solve it. I mean, if I go to the Canadian government and find out what they were doing, and this
Sure.
guy had talked with the aliens, and had the Flying Saucer Observatory, and said that flying saucers are real, the whole bit. And I got a little more reaction when I did all that research and put that out, and still it didn't convince everybody. And then I went from there. I came across Dr. Eric Walker, who was a former president of Penn State University, that we happened to come across, that he knew what was going on. And for 8 years, a bunch of us researchers bugged him, and we put out the book with all the transcripts of all the interviews and letters that we had shared with him. And I figured, well, that'll convince people. And I remember the reporter who had done the story. When we broke the story, we went to the reporter at Penn State University, and she went to interview him, and for the first time he hung up the phone. He said, I deny it, sorry, I'm busy, and hung up the phone. And I asked my co-author who lived at Penn State, who was writing the book, I said, well, when is she going back? And he said, well, she's not. They were so intimidated by this guy, and I thought, well,
your relatives down the road will look back and say,
you think you've broken the story.
I'm proud to have
and
been
from there,
associated with this person. This person was one of my
the,
relatives who either worked
So
for
I
or
went to the
against it.
Truman Library to look
I
for the
don't think
Walker
whether
files, and when I got to the
disclosure
Truman
happens
Library,
this year or next year is going to be
they had a
critical.
couple
What
letters
is going to
that didn't have
be
anything that I
important
was
is going to
looking
be
for.
what we did for it.
And
So
at
that's
that
the way
point,
I
was
work,
sitting
is
there
I
at
do
the
as
Truman
much as I
Library, and
can
said,
to
well,
move it
over the
along
there
and
must be other
let the
documents
people
here about
500 years from
UFOs.
now
And then it came
evaluate
down to this thing I
whether
have
we
on the
did right
website.
or whether we
What is
did
the
wrong.
most powerful man in
And
the world
in that
on
regard,
the
you're going
most
to have a
important
situation
subject?
where Steve
And
Bassett,
I
who
went to
I've
Truman,
known
and then
him
when I
for
went
many
to the
years,
Eisenhower Library,
has a pretty rough life. He's sort
you
of
have to
given
do
up
an
his
interview there,
life,
and I sat in
any
the
sort of
room when I was getting interviewed
nice
to
lifestyle
research there.
to do this issue. And
And
I think
I said to them,
500
well,
years
I'm
from
looking
now,
for the
history will
UFO
treat
stuff, and
Steve
they already
Bassett
knew.
very well.
So they had
The same
done a
as
search, and they had 5 documents, and it was about 8 pages of documents, whatever it was, and they had 29 million pages of
the same
material in the
situation
Eisenhower
occurs
Library.
because I've
And I
gotten to
thought,
know Angela Joyner fairly
this
well.
is something
Angela
else.
Joyner is
5
now without a
pages
job. She
out of
stood the
29
ground
million
Yeah.
pages
and
of
had a
drawing.
choice
And
between
at
her
that
job
point,
and the
I started to go
UFO
around
witnesses that were
and
coming to her.
sort of
She
deal with
chose
this
the
question.
UFO
I've seen
witnesses.
your questions
And I think that her
as to,
daughters,
what does the president know?
relatives,
Does he
many
really know
years from
anything?
down the road will be
And
very
that
proud
whole
that Angela Joyner was one of
sort
her
of
relatives.
pursuit as to
In the same
this
light,
guy constitutionally should know what's going on, but does he know what's going on? So that's
in
where
the
I
same light,
started.
I think it was, I'm not 100% certain, but I don't think
once
Phil
I've been to
Klass
all the
had any
libraries, and I've
kids.
sort of
So it's a good thing
been
because
unable
500
to
years from now, there's
100%
nobody going to be
resolve the
embarrassed that they were
question.
actually
And
related
I've
to
sort
this
of
guy.
gone into this world of the spooks and
Now, to get into the
in
final
the
three
CIA,
candidates,
these
and
type
I
of
say
people, this Avery
on the bottom line,
stuff
none
like
of these
that,
people are
which
going to
I
do
think
anything.
offers more answers than I found when I was working with the presidents.
Wow. Yeah, let me just kind of launch into it. You already made a couple points there I'm going to want to double back on. The radio show is called Time and Space, and our homepage is timeandspace.us. We are going to be speaking for the next little while here with Grant Cameron, and it's just, as I say, a thrill to get to finally talk to you. As I said to you just a couple minutes ago, I've been kind of following your work now for the past couple of years, and it's a little tough to keep up with because I'm so busy trying to investigate, some stuff on my own and interviewing other people.
Yep.
And it's sort of closing a circle here, being able to come back around to you.
Sure.
The thing that prompted me to finally chase you down, of course, is these White House petitions, and in particular, Steve Bassett's now second petition. And I just want to launch into this because I really only have one line written here for my own reference, and that's the Rockefeller Initiative. I'm wondering, first of all, how you became aware of that, and secondly, why it is that Lawrence Rockefeller pursued this in the first place. What do you know about that?
your relatives down the road will look back and say, I'm proud to have been associated with this person. This person was one of my relatives who either worked for or against it. I don't think whether disclosure happens this year or next year is going to be critical. What is going to be important is going to be what we did for it. So that's the way I work, is I do as much as I can to move it along and let the people 500 years from now evaluate whether we did right or whether we did wrong. And in that regard, you're going to have a situation where Steve Bassett, who I've known him for many years, has a pretty rough life. He's sort of given up his life, any sort of nice lifestyle to do this issue. And I think 500 years from now, history will treat Steve Bassett very well. The same as
Bush or Clinton, he was going to go to the president, and he was going to get them to disclose.
The same situation occurs because I've gotten to know Angela Joyner fairly well. Angela Joyner is now without a job. She stood the ground and had a choice between her job and the UFO witnesses that were coming to her. She chose the UFO witnesses. And I think that her daughter's relatives many years from down the road will be very proud that Angela Joyner was one of her relatives.
It really was just a matter of timing. You know, that's the other thing that I have here is Hillary Clinton's name, Bill and Hillary.
In the same light, I think it was, I'm not 100% certain, but I don't think Phil
you're just saying that it was that window.
So it's a good thing because 500 years from now, there's nobody going to be embarrassed that they were actually related to this guy.
He probably just would have gone to them, and it just happened to be.
Now, to get into the final three candidates, and I say on the bottom line, none of these people are going to do anything.
Just to jump right, accelerate through a few years here and jump right to the present day. You know, this is the thing that I've seen in a couple of articles. There was an article by Lee Spiegel that had come out in the Huffington Post. I'm sure there were many others where they were sort of challenging, hey, what is this Rockefeller initiative? You know, what are these people talking about?
And who either worked for or against
not that you would know this, I had actually exchanged a couple of emails with this Huffington Post reporter. And he was coming back to me saying, just
that's the way I work.
I don't know, does anybody know what the Rockefeller Initiative is? And would anybody in the Obama administration know? Well, of course they would, because it was Hillary Clinton, of all people. So, you know, that's the thing. Once he does get a hold of the Clintons, the thing that surprised me, because I don't think I had this correct when I sort of listened to the story the first time, but this went on, this exchange with the Clintons and Bill Clinton's office. This went on for more than, what, 3 years? They went back and forth? That's incredible.
They were trying to push him off the whole time.
The same situation occurs because I've gotten to know Angela Joyner fairly well. Angela Joyner is now without a job. She stood the ground and had a choice between her job and the UFO witnesses that were coming to her. She chose the UFO witnesses. And I think that her daughter's relatives many years from down the road will be very proud that Angela Joyner was one of her relatives. In the same light, in the same light, I think it was, I'm not 100% certain, but I don't think Phil Klass had any kids. So it's a good thing because 500 years from now, there's nobody going to be embarrassed that they were actually related to this guy. Now, to get into the final three candidates, and I say on the bottom line, none of these people are going to do anything.
For a briefing to bring them up to speed on, like, what does the government know, what's going on. And Ronald Pandolfi from the CIA had gone to him and basically told him, don't touch the issue. And so he went to Rockefeller, and he basically sort of tried to put Rockefeller off. And if you talk to Scott Jones, who was in the room with Rockefeller,
your relatives down the road will look back and say, I'm proud to have been associated with this person. This person was one of my relatives who either worked for or against it. I don't think whether disclosure happens this year or next year is going to be critical. What is going to be important is going to be what we did for it. So that's the way I work, is I do as much as I can to move it along and let the people 500 years from now evaluate whether we did right or whether we did wrong. And in that regard, you're going to have a situation where Steve Bassett, who I've known him for many years, has a pretty rough life. He's sort of given up his life, any sort of nice lifestyle to do this issue. And I think 500 years from now, history will treat Steve Bassett very well. The same as...
and that's what they were trying to do. You have to say policy. And the Clintons was trying to stop him from going...
The same situation occurs because I've gotten to know Angela Joyner fairly well. Angela Joyner is now without a job. She stood the ground and had a choice between her job and the UFO witnesses that were coming to her. She chose the UFO witnesses. And I think that her daughter's relatives many years down the road will be very proud that Angela Joyner was one of her relatives. In the same light, I think it was, I'm not 100% certain, but I don't think Phil Klass had any kids. So it's a good thing because 500 years from now, there's nobody going to be embarrassed that they were actually related to this guy.
In Wyoming.
Now, to get into the final three candidates, and I say on the bottom line, none of these people are going to do anything.
Away from the CIA, and Rockefeller was able to get him in a position where he was able to talk to him. But that was the only time that Rockefeller actually directly talked to the president. The rest of the time, he was dealing with Jack Gibbons. Now, I've got the 1,000 pages of documents. I have since then tried to recover those 1,000 pages of documents. I've been to the Clinton Library. I've been to the National. They sent me to the National Archives. Went to the National Archives. Those thousands of pages of documents, I don't know where they are. I cannot find them anymore. I've got them. I even sent them a list of the actual documents, like the dates, the times, like an inventory of the documents that they sent me. And they say, nope, can't find them. We don't know where they are. And what you got to remember with the OSTP is that it isn't an agency where all the documents are still going to be in the agency.
Your relatives down the road will look back and say, I'm proud to have been associated with this person. This person was one of my relatives who either worked for or against it. I don't think whether disclosure happens this year or next year is going to be critical. What is going to be important is going to be what we did for it. So that's the way I work, is I do as much as I can to move it along and let the people 500 years from now evaluate whether we did right or whether we did wrong. And in that regard, you're going to have a situation where Steve Bassett, who I've known him for many years, has a pretty rough life. He's sort of given up his life, any sort of nice lifestyle to do this issue. And I think 500 years from now, history will treat Steve Bassett very well. The same as
you wrote this White House opinion on UFOs and put it out. My question is...
The same situation occurs because I've gotten to know Angela Joyner fairly well. Angela Joyner is now without a job. She stood the ground and had a choice between her job and the UFO witnesses that were coming to her. She chose the UFO witnesses.
Exactly.
And I think that her daughter's relatives many years down the road will be very proud that Angela Joyner was one of her relatives. In the same light... In the same light, I think it was, I'm not 100% certain, but I don't think Phil Klass had any kids. So it's a good thing because 500 years from now, there's nobody going to be embarrassed that they were actually related to this guy.
Obama doesn't know, Larson doesn't know.
Now, to get into the final three candidates, and I say on the bottom line, none of these people are going to do anything.
You're going to go to the National Intelligence Office, you're going to go to the CIA, you're going to go wherever, and say, we'd like to get a briefing on this subject. We want to know what's going on. What is the government position? And that's the important thing when I've dealt with people. I was